My family spent 2 years planning my public humiliation at Christmas dinner. They had forged bank statements, printed charts, a room full of witnesses ready to watch them save me. Uncle Daniel called me 3 days before Christmas, whispering from his car outside our family's $3 million Greenwich estate. "Clara," he said, "don't come to dinner. They've planned an intervention." I was 28 years old. I'd built a jewelry business from nothing, and my own family was preparing to dismantle it in front of an audience because they couldn't accept that their disappointing daughter hadn't failed the way they expected her to. For years, they'd called my work a jewelry hobby, trinkets, macaroni art. Now they'd invited relatives, family friends, even business connections to watch them prove I was delusional. They had PowerPoint slides, financial evidence, a job application from my cousin's law firm, because obviously the solution was to abandon my business and become another acceptable Bennett. What they didn't realize was that everything they'd prepared was built on assumptions, not facts. They'd never asked to see my contracts, they'd never looked at my real numbers, they'd never bothered to ask how my business was actually doing. And I wasn't walking into Christmas dinner empty-handed. I had receipts they didn't know existed, documents that would turn their concerned intervention into something much uglier. A performance designed to pull me back into their definition of success. This Christmas, they were going to learn what happens when you try to control someone who finally has proof. The Bennett family had a very specific definition of success, and it didn't include creativity. For 3 generations, we'd been lawyers, corporate attorneys in $1,000 suits, practicing the kind of old money respectability that treated risk like a moral failing. Our Greenwich estate had been in the family since 1952. The dining room, where verdicts on life choices were quietly handed down, could seat 20 people. In our family, creativity wasn't admired, it was diagnosed. My father ran Bennett and Associates, the same firm his father built. My mother sat on charity boards and curated our reputation with the same care she curated her guest lists. My older brother James followed the blueprint perfectly. Harvard Law, partnership track, wife who looked right at fundraising galas. Then there was me. At 18, I chose Parsons over pre-law at Yale. $60,000 in tuition my parents described as a charitable donation to expensive macaroni art lessons. They expected I'd grow out of it after a semester of playing with beads. I didn't. I graduated in jewelry design and metalworking. I learned how to work with precious stones, how to build settings meant to last generations, how to turn raw material into something personal and permanent. My professors saw potential. My family saw embarrassment. When I moved to Manhattan and began taking commissions, my mother introduced me as exploring an artistic phase. When I landed my first serious client, my father asked when I planned to get serious about my future. They called it a jewelry hobby. Even as my client list grew, even as my work appeared in blogs and style features, the conversation at family gatherings never changed. When would I apply to law school? When would I stop playing with jewelry? When would I accept that art was fine for children, but adults needed respectable careers? They didn't ask about revenue. They didn't ask about contracts. They asked when I would come back into line. Over time, their concern hardened into certainty. They spoke about my failure as if it were inevitable, something to be managed, not questioned. By the time Christmas approached, they weren't waiting for me to fall anymore. They were preparing to step in. The first crack in their narrative came from an unexpected source, Grandma Eleanor. It was December 20th, her 87th birthday, and she'd had just enough champagne to stop protecting everyone else's version of the truth. I called to wish her happy birthday. What began as a pleasant conversation didn't stay that way. "Clara, dear," she said, her voice warm but deliberate, "I need to tell you something before Christmas dinner." I was in my studio, sketching a custom bracelet, but something in her tone made me set my pencil down. "What's wrong?" "It's about what they've been saying. About your little business." Little business. Even Eleanor, who'd always defended me, used their language. "They've been telling people you barely make minimum wage," she continued. "Your mother showed me numbers last week, said you were living on credit cards, that your business was failing." "Wait, what numbers?" Bank statements, or something that looked like them." A pause. "She called it concern about your financial delusions." The words settled cold in my stomach. "Grandma," I said carefully, "they've never seen my real statements." Another pause, longer this time. "Oh," she said quietly. "Oh dear. What else?" I could hear the grandfather clock in her sitting room marking time, the same clock that had measured out family dinners my entire life. Christmas dinner was meant to be your intervention, she said. Not for addiction, not for illness. For my work. They have charts prepared, Eleanor added, about your finances. I looked around my studio, at the tools on my bench, at open sketches, at documents I'd reviewed earlier that day. Real, current, and never requested by anyone in my family. Over the next hour, Eleanor filled in the rest. My mother circulating stories about my struggles. My father using my business as a cautionary tale, both of them presenting themselves as concerned parents trying to help a delusional daughter face reality. They invited people, Eleanor said, the Hendersons, the Caldwells, even some of your father's business partners. An audience. When the call ended, I stayed in my studio, staring at the workbench where I'd built everything one commission at a time. Christmas dinner wasn't about helping me. It was about performing my failure. The next morning, Rosa called me. She'd been with my family for 15 years. She'd watched me grow up, celebrated my graduation, and quietly cheered when I landed my first commission. Rosa wasn't meant to get involved in family politics, but apparently some lines had been crossed. Mija, she said, her voice low, I need to tell you something about Christmas dinner. I was making coffee in my tiny kitchen, still processing what Grandma Eleanor had told me the night before. They were planning yesterday, Rosa continued. In the study, they didn't know I was cleaning nearby. Rosa had perfected the art of being invisible when the family needed privacy. This time she'd listened. They have charts prepared, she said. Charts. Your father made slides, numbers about what you supposedly earn, what you supposedly spend. Your mother printed packets for the guests. Packets. I sat down on my kitchen stool and let the coffee cool in my hands. The kitchen felt suddenly very small. The hum of the refrigerator was loud in the silence. They invited more people than your grandmother mentioned, Rosa added. The whole dinner is built around showing everyone how worried they are about you. How many? 16. Maybe 18. Family, friends, business people your father knows. They moved it to the big dining room. The formal room, the one reserved for announcements and judgments. Your mother practiced her speech, Rosa said quietly, about how they tried to support you but can't watch you destroy your life anymore. Your father talked about a job application from your cousin's firm. A realistic option, he said. A realistic option. And James? He's bringing the application himself during dessert. They called it an opportunity to transition. I pictured it clearly then, the plates cleared, forks resting, attention focused. A pause before the reveal. There's more, Rosa said. They have evidence. What kind? Bank statements that show you're broke. Bills that say you're behind on rent, credit card debt. My grip tightened around the mug. They're fake, I said. Rosa didn't argue. Your father kept pointing at them, saying they proved you were living in denial. After the call ended, I stayed seated in my kitchen. The coffee had gone completely cold. Outside, someone laughed on the sidewalk below, unaware. They hadn't just planned an intervention. They'd rehearsed it, timed it, designed it to look inevitable. I didn't know yet what I was going to do, but I knew one thing with absolute clarity. I wasn't going to walk into that room unprepared. And they had never once asked to see the real numbers. That afternoon, while my family was finalizing their presentation, my phone rang with the call that would change everything. Clara Bennett? The voice was professional, warm. This is Sarah Chen from Sterling and Sage. I'd been waiting for this call for 3 weeks. Sterling and Sage was everything I'd worked toward, the kind of partnership that would establish me as a serious designer, not someone playing with trinkets in a studio apartment. We've reviewed your portfolio and your business projections, Sarah continued. We'd like to offer you an exclusive partnership. I sat down slowly. What would that look like? $150,000 annually as our lead custom designer, your own section in our flagship Manhattan location, full marketing support. We're talking about a 3-year initial contract with renewal options, $150,000 a year, while my family was preparing charts showing me living in poverty. We'd need an answer by January 2nd, Sarah said, but honestly, we're hoping you'll say yes. Your work is exactly what our clients are looking for. After the call ended, I pulled out my laptop and opened the folder I'd been building for months. Tax returns showing my actual income, bank statements with real numbers, client contracts with actual signatures, order backlogs that extended into March. The Sterling and Sage offer letter came through an hour later. Official letterhead, legal language, numbers that would make my family's fake documents look like what they were, Desperate fabrications. I had been earning $67,000 net profit this year alone. Not the $200 a month my family was claiming. Not barely minimum wage, not living off credit cards or drowning in debt. $67,000 with a waiting list of 40 clients and a partnership offer that would triple my income. But that wasn't even the most damning evidence I had. I opened my email and scrolled back through months of correspondence. Client thank you notes, industry professionals asking for collaborations, a jewelry blogger who'd featured my work 3 times, a Broadway costume designer who'd commissioned pieces for 2 different productions. The gap between my reality and my family's narrative wasn't just wide, it was fictional. My phone buzzed with a text from Uncle Daniel. "Can you talk? Away from the house." I called him back immediately. "They've set up a whole timeline," he said. Without preamble, "Your mother wants to present it like an intervention for addiction. Your failure to face reality about your business. They're going to ask everyone to share their concerns about your choices." "Daniel, I need to tell you something." I read him the Sterling and Sage offer letter. Word for word, the salary figure, the contract terms, the 3-year commitment. The silence on the other end stretched long enough that I thought the call had dropped. "Clara," he said finally, "they have no idea, do they? None. Jesus Christ, they're going to humiliate themselves. Only if I let them." While they planned my failure, I was signing my biggest deal ever. That evening, I spread everything across my dining table like evidence in a case I was building against my own family. Bank statements showing deposits they'd never seen, client contracts with signatures they'd never verified, tax returns with income figures that made their fake documents look like cruel jokes, the Sterling and Sage partnership offer with terms that would have impressed even my father's corporate clients. I had 2 years of receipts they'd never bothered to ask about. But the most damning evidence wasn't financial, it was photographic. Daniel had sent me pictures from inside the house. "I couldn't let them do this without you knowing exactly what you're walking into," he'd texted along with the images. The first photo showed my father's study. Charts mounted on easels like a boardroom presentation, fake bank statements blown up to poster size, a timeline of my deteriorating financial situation that began with my graduation and ended with my supposed current crisis. They'd created an entire mythology around my failure. The second photo was worse. Packets laid out on the dining room sideboard, one for each guest. My supposed financial documents, bound with ribbon like wedding favors, a gift of my humiliation for everyone to take home. I sat back in my chair and let that sink in. This wasn't panic, this wasn't concern. This was planning. The attention to detail was staggering. They'd printed business cards for financial counselors, created a resource list for career transitions, even prepared talking points about enabling versus helping that guests could reference during the intervention. They forged documents to justify destroying my reputation, I said aloud to my empty apartment. Rosa had photographed the seating chart too. 18 place cards arranged around the formal dining table. My seat was positioned at the far end, isolated like a defendant facing trial. The guest list read like my father's professional network: lawyers, financial advisors, family friends who'd known me since childhood. An audience of 18 people who would witness what my family thought was my inevitable collapse. But Rosa hadn't just documented their preparations, she'd also overheard their final planning session. "Your mother called it tough love," Rosa had told me during her second call. "Sometimes you have to be cruel to be kind." Those were her exact words. Tough love. As if orchestrating my professional destruction in front of their social circle was an act of parental concern. Grandma Eleanor called while I was organizing the evidence. "I've been thinking about our conversation," she said. "I want you to know, I never believed their numbers." "Why not?" "Because I've been sending you birthday checks for 10 years. I know what account they go into, I know they clear." A pause. "Your grandmother isn't completely senile yet, dear." Eleanor had been keeping track. While my parents fabricated poverty, she'd been watching my real bank account accept her gifts without bouncing. Your grandmother always knew they were lying. The final piece came from Uncle Daniel himself, not just photographs, but audio recordings from his phone. "I recorded their last planning session," he admitted when he called. "I thought you should hear exactly what they're saying about you." I put the phone on speaker and listened to my mother's voice, clear and deliberate. "She needs to understand that playing with jewelry isn't a career. Sometimes reality requires an intervention. My father followed. The numbers don't lie. She's hemorrhaging money and living in fantasy. We're doing this because we love her. The numbers don't lie, except every single one of them did. Tomorrow night, either Clara accepts help or she faces the consequences of her choices, my mother concluded. When the recording ended, I sat in the quiet of my apartment, surrounded by evidence of a success they refused to see and a conspiracy they'd spent weeks perfecting. They wanted to perform my failure for an audience of 18 people. I gathered the evidence back into its folders. Tomorrow night, they would still have their presentation. It just wouldn't end the way they rehearsed. I spent the next morning making the kind of decision that would have horrified my family if they'd known about it. I wasn't going to Christmas dinner. Instead, I booked a train ticket to Philadelphia, one way, departing Christmas morning at 11:30. I'd spend the holiday with my college roommate Sarah and her family, people who'd watched me build my business from the beginning and never questioned whether it was real. I wouldn't give them the satisfaction of an audience, but that didn't mean I was walking away quietly. While my family set their table and arranged their charts, I was preparing a different kind of presentation. I called my lawyer, Marcus Webb. Yes, I had a lawyer, another fact that would have surprised them, and asked him to prepare a cease and desist letter. What exactly are they doing? He asked. I explained the fake documents, the planned humiliation, the 18 witnesses they'd invited to watch my professional destruction. Jesus, Clara, that's not an intervention, that's defamation. Marcus agreed to draft a letter that would arrive by certified mail on December 26th, but more importantly, he helped me plan something else entirely. What if we scheduled a conference call during their dinner? He suggested. You could address their concerns directly on your terms. A conference call from Philadelphia during dessert, when they were expecting to present their job application and watch me collapse. If they wanted a performance, they'd get one. The beauty of the plan was its simplicity. They'd built their entire evening around my presence, my humiliation, my breakdown, my acceptance of their rescue. Without me there, their carefully orchestrated intervention would fall apart, but I wouldn't leave them empty-handed. Rosa agreed to help coordinate the timing. I'll be serving dessert around 8:30, she said. That's when they plan to bring out the application. Perfect! Can you put me on speaker when I call? I can make sure the whole dining room hears you, mija. Uncle Daniel had his own role to play. He'd agreed to document everything. Their confusion when I didn't arrive, their scrambling to salvage the evening, their reaction when I called with evidence they'd never expected me to have. I've been complicit in this family's toxicity for too long, he said during our final planning call. It's time someone stood up to them. Grandma Eleanor offered the most devastating support of all. She controlled the family trust funds, owned 40% of Bennett and Associates, and had spent 87 years perfecting the art of cutting remarks delivered with perfect politeness. I'll be at dinner, she said, and I think it's time I shared some observations about their parenting methods. The people who really knew me were ready to fight, but as Christmas Eve approached, I found myself questioning the plan. Not because I doubted my evidence or my right to defend myself, but because I was about to permanently alter my relationship with my family. There would be no going back after this, no pretending their concerns were genuine or their methods acceptable. Once I exposed their lies in front of their social circle, the dynamic would be forever changed. I was choosing my dignity over their comfort, my truth over their narrative, my success over their need to control it. It was the right choice. But it wasn't an easy one. On Christmas Eve night, I packed my bag for Philadelphia and reviewed my evidence one last time. Bank statements, contracts, client testimonials, the Sterling and Sage partnership offer. Everything they'd dismissed without ever asking to see. Tomorrow, they'd learn the cost of underestimating someone they'd spent years trying to control. Christmas Day arrived gray and cold, the kind of weather that made staying inside feel like the only reasonable choice. I was on a train to Philadelphia while my family was setting their formal dining room for my intervention. At 6:30 that evening, while they were serving cocktails and explaining to their guests why I was running late, I called Rosa. They're getting worried, she whispered. Your mother keeps checking the time. Are they all there? 18 people. The Hendersons brought their son home from college. Your father's been showing people the charts. I could picture it perfectly. My father in his element, presenting evidence like a closing argument. My mother playing the concerned parent, sharing their difficult decision to intervene. The guests nodding sympathetically, already convinced of my delusions before I'd even failed to show up. Put me on speaker when they start dessert, I said. At 8:20, Rosa called back. It's time. I heard silverware clinking, the murmur of post-dinner conversation, someone complimenting the wine selection, then my father's voice raised to address the room. Before we serve dessert, Margaret and I wanted to talk to you all about why we asked you here tonight. This was it. As many of you know, our daughter Clara has been struggling with some financial difficulties. We've tried to be supportive, but we've reached the point where we need to take action. Papers rustled, packets being handed out. James has brought a job application from his firm. It's time Clara understood that playing with jewelry isn't sustainable. That was when I called the landline. Rosa answered and immediately put me on speaker. Hello, I said, my voice carrying clearly across the formal dining room. I hope everyone's enjoying dinner. The silence was immediate, total. Clara? My mother sounded sharp now. Where are you? I'm in Philadelphia, having a lovely Christmas with people who actually support my career. What career? My father's voice cut in, dismissive and practiced. Clara, we have guests here who are concerned about your situation. My situation, right. I opened the folder beside me. Should I start with my tax returns showing $67,000 in net profit this year? Or would you prefer the Sterling and Sage partnership contract worth $150,000 annually? The silence stretched. I'm reading my six-figure contract while you choke on your lies, I continued calmly. Would your guests like the actual numbers, because I have them? I read the Sterling and Sage terms slowly. The salary, the 3-year commitment, the exclusive designer position in their Manhattan flagship. This contract was signed yesterday, I said, while you were printing fake bank statements. Clara, that's enough, my father said, his confident courtroom tone cracking. These claims need to be verified before we jump to conclusions. We were only trying to help. Actually, they already have been, I said, by my accountant, my lawyer, and my business partners. I continued anyway. My real bank balance, my client list, a waiting list of 40 people commissioning work for next year. Whispers rippled through the room. Did she say 40? Someone asked. Uncle Daniel spoke up. Some of us never believed their numbers. The documents you were given are fake, I said, addressing the room directly. Every statement, every bill, fabricated. Would anyone like to explain how that qualifies as tough love? Margaret? Mrs. Henderson asked quietly. Is this true? She's delusional, my mother said, but the word landed hollow. She's been living beyond her means for years. Actually, I've been saving for years, I replied. I own my equipment outright. My rent's always paid early, and last month I put a deposit down on a larger workspace because my business is expanding. Voices overlapped now. Congratulations, confusion, questions. Why didn't you tell us she was doing so well? Someone asked. The question hung there. My father tried to regain control, but the room no longer belonged to him. They called my work trinkets, I said, but it turns out their credibility is the thing that's worthless. No one was looking at me anymore. All eyes were on my parents. The call ended with my mother hanging up, but the damage was already done. Rosa texted me updates throughout the evening. Guests leaving early, confused conversations in the hallway. My father locked in his study making phone calls. What had been planned as an intervention turned into something else entirely, an interrogation with my parents at the center of it. Mrs. Henderson asked for your business card before she left, Rosa wrote, said her daughter might want a custom necklace. Even in the wreckage of their plan, my work was still doing what it always had, speaking for itself. The certified letter from my lawyer arrived at the Greenwich House on December 26th, addressed to both my parents, a formal cease and desist regarding defamation and fraudulent documents, with copies of their fabricated financial records attached. Uncle Daniel called later that afternoon. Your father's been on the phone with lawyers all morning, he said, trying to figure out if you can actually sue them. Can I? Apparently, yes. Creating fake financial documents to damage someone's reputation is textbook defamation. He paused. Your mother hasn't stopped crying. I felt something then, not guilt exactly, but recognition. They hadn't just lost a Christmas dinner, they'd lost credibility, trust, the quiet authority they'd relied on for decades. And they'd lost any claim to my life. New Year's Eve found me in my expanded studio space, surrounded by people who had supported me long before any contract or public vindication. Sarah drove down from Philadelphia. Uncle Daniel brought champagne and stories from the aftermath. Rosa stopped by after work with homemade cookies and questions about my expansion plans. Grandma Eleanor arrived last. She handed me a check from the family trust, $50,000. Considerate support, she said, settling into my desk chair. You were always going to succeed. This just makes it quieter. We toasted at midnight. The sterling and sage contract was framed on the wall beside my first client testimonial. The space felt earned. In the weeks that followed, things shifted back in Greenwich. Invitations stopped coming. Conversations ended sooner than they used to. My parents weren't shunned, but they were no longer deferred to. They'd tried to dismantle my reputation and only managed to expose themselves. They stopped calling my work a hobby. Not out of respect, but because they no longer had the authority to dismiss something that had proven them wrong so publicly. The expectations that once defined my life no longer applied. I unlocked my studio, turned on the lights, and got back to work.